It's been 5 years since a state-of-the-art aircraft disappeared.
Nobody expects a 777 to vanish. It just doesn't happen.
Where is Malaysia Airlines Flight 370?
On a clear March night in 2014, one of the safest airplanes in the world, a Boeing 777, lifted off from Kuala Lumpur with 239 souls on board. Within hours, that plane slipped into the greatest mystery of modern aviation. No distress call, no wreckage, no answers. For more than a decade, the ocean floor has been searched, satellites have been studied, and billions have been spent. Yet the truth about flight MH370 has remained maddeningly out of reach. Now, a surprising new theory is back in the spotlight. It doesn't rely on satellites or military radar, but on faint signals so weak they were almost forgotten. And the man behind it? Not a government agency, not a corporation, but a retired engineer who believes he's finally solved the puzzle. Could this be the breakthrough the world has been waiting for? When normal turned into nightmare. At first, everything looked routine. Just after midnight, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 climbed steadily into the night sky, heading north toward Beijing. The crew exchanged calm radio chatter, the passengers settled in, and nothing suggested what was coming. Then, at 1:19 a.m., the last words from the cockpit crackled through the radio. "Good night, Malaysian 370. 2 minutes later, the plane's transponder, the very system that makes an aircraft visible on radar, shut off. Civilian air traffic control screens went dark, but the plane didn't simply vanish. Military radar, still tracking objects with raw reflections, picked up a new path. The Boeing had turned sharply, deliberately, back across Malaysia, flying toward the Andaman Sea. For more than an hour, it appeared as a ghostly blip moving against its intended course, until finally, at 2:22 a.m., even that signal disappeared. To the world, it looked like the jet had been swallowed whole. But in reality, something stranger was happening. Something that would only come to light through scraps of satellite data and a trail of faint signals almost no one thought to check. The plane that kept whispering. When the radar screens went dark, investigators thought MH370 was gone for good. No distress calls, no emergency squawk codes, just silence. But while the aircraft wasn't talking to air traffic control anymore, it wasn't completely silent. The plane's satellite communication unit, the Satellite Data Unit, or SDU, had quietly logged back onto an orbiting Inmarsat satellite. This wasn't designed for tracking planes. It was just a technical handshake, a simple ping to confirm the system was still online. Those pings continued for nearly 6 hours, 7 in total. Each was like a faint ghost knocking on a door in the sky. No flight data, no cockpit voices, no coordinates, just timing and frequency shifts. But in those scraps of information lay the only breadcrumbs investigators had left. Engineers discovered 2 critical clues hidden in the pings. The burst timing offset, BTO, how long it took the signal to travel to the satellite and back. The burst frequency offset, BFO, tiny shifts caused by the Doppler effect as the plane moved. By mapping these values, investigators plotted possible flight paths. They didn't get exact tracks, only giant arcs sweeping across the globe. One path pointed north, across Asia. The other plunged south, deep into the Indian Ocean. The northern route was quickly dismissed. Too many militaries, too much radar coverage. Someone would have seen a rogue 777 crossing their skies. That left only the southern arc, which ended in a lonely curve of ocean at 8:19 a.m. According to the math, that was when MH370 most likely ran out of fuel and spiraled down somewhere in the Indian Ocean. It was the beginning of what became known as the Seventh Arc, a haunting line on a map where the answers were supposed to be waiting. The search that found nothing. Once investigators locked onto the Seventh Arc, the world's attention turned to the Indian Ocean. What followed was the most expensive and ambitious deep-sea hunt in aviation history. Ships, planes, satellites, and later fleets of underwater drones were deployed to scour the ocean floor. The official search zone covered more than 120,000 square kilometers, an area about the size of Pennsylvania. At first, optimism was high. The Inmarsat data seemed revolutionary. If the math pointed to the Seventh Arc, surely the wreckage would be there. Crews dragged sonar arrays across trenches, volcanic ridges, and muddy plains at depths of up to 6,000 meters. They mapped more of the seafloor than had ever been charted in history. And yet, nothing. No wings, no fuselage, no engines, not even a tail section that could float. For years, teams came back empty-handed. But then, hope flickered. In 2015, over a year after the disappearance, a beachcomber on Reunion Island found a torn wing fragment, a flaperon, confirmed to be from MH370. More debris followed: interior paneling in Mozambique, engine cowling in Madagascar, cabin parts in Tanzania. These fragments proved the plane had gone down in the ocean, but they raised disturbing questions. The flaperon's trailing edge was shredded, consistent with violent flutter in high-speed descent. Other fragments bore signs of overload fractures, not careful ditching. Even the flap settings suggested the aircraft wasn't prepared for a water landing. It was still in cruise mode when it hit. The more experts studied the wreckage, the more it contradicted the gentle glide theory. Instead, it looked like MH370 had slammed into the ocean in a catastrophic, uncontrolled impact. Meanwhile, families of the 239 passengers waited in agony. The official search had cost hundreds of millions of dollars and delivered little more than heartbreak. By 2017, governments suspended the operation. They admitted the plane was still missing, and the trail, for now, had gone cold. But mysteries like this don't stay quiet for long. The story that was too easy. When investigators paused the search, a story began to take hold. A story that, on the surface, made the mystery seem simple. The official theory went like this. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a veteran pilot with over 18,000 hours, deliberately hijacked his own plane. He turned off the transponder, made a U-turn, depressurized the cabin to knock everyone else unconscious, and flew south alone for hours. When the fuel ran out, the Boeing nosedived into the sea, a ghost flight ending in tragedy. It was a chilling theory, tailor-made for headlines. A respected pilot turned villain. A plane full of people drifting helplessly while he carried out a secret suicide mission. But scratch beneath the surface, and the theory collapses. First, the satellite data. The last burst frequency offset readings didn't suggest a calm descent. They suggested a violent nosedive, dropping at up to 15,000 feet per minute. That's not a controlled glide. That's a plane falling from the sky. Second, the wreckage fragments told the same story. The flaperon and wing parts showed signs of overload and flutter, damage only possible in a high-speed crash. If Zahari had attempted a ditching, the flaps would have been extended, and more of the plane might have survived intact. Instead, the evidence pointed to brute force destruction. And third, the search itself. The seventh ark was treated like gospel, but it was built on assumptions: fuel burn rates, autopilot settings, straight-line flight paths. The Indian Ocean is a vast, shifting wilderness. Basing the entire search on one narrow arc was like looking for a needle in the wrong haystack. The pilot's suicide theory was neat. It was easy. But it ignored the messy, contradictory evidence staring investigators in the face. And in that void, one man decided to try something radical. The engineer who refused to let go. By the time government suspended the official search, most of the world had moved on. The tragedy was sealed in headlines: "Lost at sea." But for families, experts, and a handful of determined outsiders, the lack of closure was unbearable. One of those people was Richard Godfrey, a retired British aerospace engineer. With decades of experience in systems design, he wasn't satisfied with the official explanations. The satellite arcs were clever, but incomplete. The pilot's suicide story was convenient, but flawed. Somewhere, he believed, the data still held answers. Godfrey wasn't working with billion-dollar budgets, fleets of ships, or classified radar. Instead, sitting at his desk, he began studying a tool few outside amateur radio circles even knew existed: WSPR, Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. At first glance, WSPR seemed unrelated to aviation. It was designed for ham radio hobbyists who wanted to test how far their faint radio signals could travel. These signals were whisper quiet, less than 1 watt, weaker than a nightlight. But thanks to the ionosphere, they could bounce across oceans and continents. Here's the strange part. Every time one of those signals traveled from one station to another, it was logged in a global database called WSPR-Net. Millions of entries, billions of data points, a digital spider web of radio whispers stretching around the entire planet. And Godfrey had a thought. What if a massive object, say a Boeing 777, cut across those signals? Would it leave a disturbance? If it did, then MH370's path might still be hiding in plain sight, written into years of WSPR logs. Most experts dismiss the idea as impossible. The signals were too faint, the ocean too vast. But Godfrey wasn't deterred. He built custom software to filter out solar storms, interference, and random noise. He spent years combing through the WSPR archive, sifting through 200 billion data entries. And then, something remarkable happened. On the night MH370 disappeared, Godfrey identified around 130 anomalies in WSPR signals stretching across the Indian Ocean. Tiny disruptions, timed almost exactly with the plane's known satellite pings. When he plotted them on a map, they weren't random. They traced a path, starting from where military radar last saw MH370, then curving southwest before turning due south. And the trail didn't fade away. It ended at a precise location in the Indian Ocean that no search team had ever touched. For the first time in years, someone had proposed a brand new crash site. Not a vague arc, not a guess, an exact set of coordinates. 29.128 degrees south, 99.934 degrees east. Deep water, remote, but far more precise than anything the official investigations had offered. Testing the invisible trail. Finding a trail of anomalies in radio logs is one thing. Convincing the world it points to MH370 is another. Godfrey knew numbers on a page wouldn't be enough. His work had to withstand the harshest scrutiny. So he took his findings to experts who had solved similar mysteries before. The same analysts who helped locate Air France Flight 447 after it crashed into the Atlantic in 2009. These weren't hobbyists. They were professionals, armed with advanced statistical models and years of experience. The first test was timing. Did the WSPR disturbances line up with MH370's known satellite pings? If they were random, they would appear hours off. But Godfrey's anomalies matched within 4 minutes of each Inmarsat handshake. That level of precision was almost impossible to dismiss. The second test was geometry. Inmarsat could only draw vague arcs. WSPR signals, however, always traveled along exact paths between two stations. If a plane disturbed those paths, you could cross them like lines on a map. Godfrey's anomalies didn't scatter. They converged, narrowing the search area to corridors as slim as 20 kilometers. The third test was signal strength. Weak signals could be dismissed as noise, but Godfrey filtered his results to only include disturbances at -25 decibels or stronger. After stripping away false alarms, he was left with 130 solid anomalies, all forming a consistent track across the southern Indian Ocean. When the University of Liverpool team ran the data through Bayesian analysis, their models showed a 74% probability that MH370's wreckage was sitting in a small box centered on Godfrey's coordinates. For the first time since 2014, the data wasn't just intriguing, it was statistically compelling. But as with all bold ideas, the pushback came fast. The pushback and the doubts. No matter how strong the numbers looked, Richard Godfrey's theory was never going to be accepted without a fight. In aviation, especially with something as emotionally charged as MH370, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. And almost immediately, critics lined up with objections. The first objection was blunt. WSPR was never meant for this. And they were right, at least in part. Weak Signal Propagation Reporter was created by amateur radio hobbyists, not aviation accident investigators. Its original purpose was to let radio operators test how far their faint signals could bounce around the globe. The idea that those same signals could track a lost airliner seemed outrageous. But science is full of tools repurposed in ways their inventors never intended. X-rays were discovered by accident. Penicillin was found by mistake. Even GPS, now used by billions to find coffee shops or avoid traffic jams, was originally designed as a military navigation system. The physics behind WSPR was sound. Radio waves bend and scatter when large objects cross their path. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Joe Taylor, the man who invented WSPR, acknowledged that airplanes can disturb the signals. Whether those disturbances could be used to reconstruct a flight path was the real question. And so, Godfrey set out to prove it. A test flight across the ocean. In late 2022, his team worked with researchers at the University of Liverpool to stage a daring experiment. They chartered a Boeing 777 and flew it along a corridor in the Indian Ocean, mirroring the suspected route of MH370. All the while, WSPR stations around the globe kept transmitting their faint whispers. As the 777 crossed those invisible threads, the signals wavered. The disturbances were subtle, but they were real, and they appeared exactly where the plane was flying. The timing lined up to the minute. The geometry matched perfectly. This wasn't a theory anymore. It was a live demonstration that WSPR could indeed detect an aircraft slicing across the radio web. The experiment didn't solve MH370, but it silenced the loudest skeptics who claimed WSPR was just noise. The moving target accusation. The second objection was more personal. Godfrey keeps moving the goalposts. Critics pointed out that his early calculations placed the crash site farther south, near 33 degrees south. Later revisions shifted it to 34 degrees south. Only after combing through more WSPR data did the location stabilize at 29.128 degrees south, 99.934 degrees east. To outsiders, it looked like guesswork. But in science, refining results isn't weakness, it's progress. Early astronomers miscalculated planetary orbits until better data refined the models. The same applied here. Godfrey's first runs were limited by incomplete datasets and less sophisticated filters. As more anomalies were confirmed and the algorithms improved, the drifting target finally narrowed and locked in place. For more than a year, the coordinates haven't budged. That stability turned doubters into cautious believers, the hardest objection of all. Still, one criticism remained impossible to dismiss. If the wreck is really there, why hasn't anyone found it? It was a fair point. Without a wing, an engine, or a black box hauled up from the seabed, Godfrey's theory was still just math and radio logs. Families didn't want probabilities, they wanted proof. But oceanographers began to weigh in. At Germany's Geomar Helmholtz Center, scientists ran sophisticated drift simulations of the Indian Ocean. They traced the paths debris would have taken from known discovery points: Réunion Island, Madagascar, Mozambique. The results were startling. Again and again, the drift models converged back toward the very zone Godfrey had identified with WSPR. Within about 100 kilometers of his hotspot, the virtual message-in-a-bottle experiments lined up. This independent confirmation added serious weight. The debris on African shores, the flaperon on Réunion, and the anomalies in WSPR logs all pointed to the same remote corner of the ocean. It wasn't proof yet, but it was far more than coincidence, the return to the deep. For years, the Indian Ocean kept it secret, but now, for the first time since 2018, the search for MH370 is gearing up again. And this time, the mission is focused, precise, and armed with better technology than ever before. The heavy hitter in this renewed effort is Ocean Infinity, a marine robotics company that had already led a large-scale search back in 2018. That earlier mission covered vast stretches of sea floor, but ultimately came up empty. Since then, however, their technology has advanced by leaps and bounds. At the heart of Ocean Infinity's arsenal are its Hugin Autonomous Underwater Vehicles, or AUVS. These robotic submarines are the cutting edge of deep-sea exploration. They can dive down to 6,000 meters, roam untethered for days at a time, and sweep the seabed with high-resolution sonar that can pick out objects as small as a car under miles of water. Unlike the earlier search efforts, which often relied on slower towed sonar systems, the Hugin fleet moves independently, covering ground much faster. A single AUV can scan about 500 square kilometers in a day. With multiple units operating simultaneously, Ocean Infinity's entire fleet can map a 15,000 square kilometer box in about a month. And that box? It's not just a random swath of the ocean anymore. It's the precise zone that Richard Godfrey's WSPR analysis has identified, centered on those haunting coordinates at 29.128 degrees south, 99.934 degrees east. The high-stakes deal. Malaysia's government has now officially backed this new mission. In January 2025, Transport Minister Anthony Loke signed a contract with Ocean Infinity to resume the search. The deal is structured as no find, no fee. That means Ocean Infinity is fronting the enormous cost of the operation, estimated around $70 million. They'll only be paid if they succeed in locating MH370's wreckage. This financial gamble tells its own story. Ocean Infinity isn't a charity. They wouldn't risk tens of millions of dollars unless they were convinced the data pointed somewhere worth searching. With cyclone season in the southern Indian Ocean finally easing, conditions are opening up. Ships are being prepared, AUVs calibrated, and the mission is set to begin within weeks. Why this time feels different? For more than a decade, MH370 has symbolized frustration. Every lead has ended in heartbreak, every theory drowned in the immensity of the ocean. But this time, the pieces line up in a way they never have before. Precise coordinates, not a vague arc, but a pinpointed location based on real anomalies in WSPR data. Independent confirmation. Drift studies show debris washing ashore from a zone consistent with Godfrey's hotspot. Proven technology. Ocean Infinity's Huygens subs have scanned wrecks before and know how to navigate the seafloor's challenges. Financial risk. The no-find, no-fee contract shows confidence that something significant lies waiting. For the first time since 2014, closure feels not just possible, but imminent. The countdown to answers. Imagine what the next month could bring. After years of silence, the Huygens subs will slip into the Indian Ocean, fanning out across the dark seafloor. Their sonar beams will sweep ridges and trenches, imaging every boulder, every crevice. And if Godfrey is right, one day soon, a sonar screen will reveal a shape too large, too symmetrical, to be natural. A wing, a fuselage, a broken tail. That discovery would not just solve a mystery, it would rewrite aviation history, deliver long-awaited answers to grieving families, and finally close a chapter of speculation and pain. The question is no longer, can MH370 be found? The question now is, are we finally days away from seeing it again? The families who never stopped waiting. Behind every theory, every map, and every sonar sweep lies the heartbreak of 239 lives cut short. Businessmen, students, grandparents, entire families vanished in silence. For more than a decade, their loved ones have lived in a suspended state, caught between grief and hope. In Beijing, Kuala Lumpur, Paris, and Perth, vigils have been held year after year. Families gather, holding faded photos and candles, demanding answers that never come. Some have campaigned tirelessly, pressing governments to reopen the search. Others have grown weary, forced to live with the ache of not knowing. For them, the idea that MH370 could finally be found is more than just solving an aviation mystery. It's about closure, about knowing where their loved ones spent their final moments, about having a grave to visit instead of a question mark on a map. Each announcement of a new search brings a wave of fragile hope. And this time, with Ocean Infinity targeting such a specific location, that hope feels heavier, because it might actually be the last. the ocean's reluctance to give up its secrets. But even with advanced technology, the Indian Ocean is a cruel search ground. It is one of the least mapped places on Earth. Its seabed is a landscape of jagged ridges, deep trenches, and shifting sediments that can bury wreckage beneath layers of silt. Waves and currents are unforgiving. Storms can halt missions for days. The sheer remoteness means ships operate far from any port, relying on their own supplies and crews working around the clock. Even if the wreckage is found, recovery won't be simple. Black boxes, if intact, could hold precious cockpit voice recordings and flight data, but their batteries went dead years ago. Extracting them from 6,000 meters below the surface would require a delicate, high-risk operation. Still, aviation history shows it can be done. Air France Flight 447 lay undiscovered for 2 years in the depths of the Atlantic before being found. Its black boxes were retrieved from nearly 4,000 meters and yielded crucial data. MH370 lies deeper, but not beyond reach. The mystery that changed aviation. No matter what the final discovery reveals, MH370 has already reshaped the world of aviation. Its disappearance exposed glaring gaps in how aircraft are tracked. In 2014, a Boeing 777 could vanish from civilian radar simply by switching off a transponder. That blind spot shocked the public. Since then, new rules have been introduced. Airlines now use more advanced satellite tracking, with position updates transmitted every few minutes. Some systems can't be disabled from the cockpit. Black boxes are being redesigned to transmit distress signals even if they sink. In other words, MH370 forced the industry to admit the unthinkable. In the 21st century, it was still possible for a jumbo jet to vanish without a trace. And so, even before the wreck is found, MH370 has left its mark, not only on the families who mourn, but on the very systems meant to keep us safe in the skies. The final question: as Ocean Infinity prepares its fleet, and Godfrey's coordinates guide them into the deep, the world waits. Will this mission end in another haunting silence, or in the discovery that finally closes the book on one of history's greatest mysteries? Because here's the truth. Even if the wreckage is found, the questions won't all disappear. We may still never know why the plane turned. We may never fully understand what happened in that cockpit after 1:19 a.m. But knowing where it ended changes everything. It transforms the story from endless speculation into grounded fact. It gives families a place to grieve. It restores faith that even the ocean's vastness cannot hide the truth forever. For over a decade, Flight MH370 has haunted us. A modern mystery in an age where nothing was supposed to remain hidden. But now, with cutting-edge technology, bold new analysis, and a renewed global effort, we may finally be standing at the edge of the answer. So what will the sonar screens reveal in the coming weeks? A barren seafloor, or the unmistakable shadow of a Boeing 777 resting beneath 6 kilometers of water? Whatever happens, one thing is certain. The story of MH370 is about to enter its final chapter. Thanks for watching, fam. If you found this video as gripping as we did, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and check out the next video on your screen. Because sometimes, the answers we seek aren't lost forever. They're just waiting to be found.